All right, so a couple things here. I have your week 7 BLA posted, and what you're going to be doing is you're going to be going into the forums and the questions to instructor forum, where you will find where you'll be posting. For whatever reason, I can't post discussion questions. I'm not allowed to do that. So we can't have a discussion question in the discussion forum. You have to do the questions to instructor forum. So that's where your week 7 BLA is. And for this, you do 4 things. You're going to identify a named diet, state the health benefits, potential risks or challenges the diet would pose. That would be like if the diet has any kind of adverse side effects, or if it's just difficult to do. Like for example, like a ketogenic diet may be very difficult because you have to give up most all of your carb consumption. So that'd be like a challenge there, not necessarily a side effect, but it's what makes that difficult. And then part 4 here is kind of more the discussion bit of it. So discuss whether you would identify this as a fad diet and why you yourself would or wouldn't try doing this. So you need to do all that. You don't need to do any sort of heavy academic research on it, but just give me a couple of the purported benefits and the potential risks or challenges posed by it. And that can even be stuff that you infer from it as well. So again, with the ketogenic diet, you don't necessarily have to have research saying that it could be challenging to eliminate carbs, because it's kind of understood that if you're eliminating a whole food group, essentially, or a whole macronutrient class, that's going to be challenging for anyone. Does that kind of make sense? So make sure you post that and then respond to at least one of your classmates, and specifically one of you want to respond to part 4 there. Yeah.
It says to make it a page long. Did you want us to do it on a Word doc, like attach it, or just put it?
You can just type it in there. It'll be easier if you just have it as a text submission, just so it'll read more of as a discussion thread, as opposed to like having to open up an attachment or something like that. And page long is a rough guideline there for you. I'm not counting individual letters, or did you use double space or 1.5 spaces. So I'm much more interested in your content than I am about your quantity. So that's that. Nothing else due this week. Next week we have our midterm. So because we're split up, I figured it's just gonna be easier to do it on MindTap. Plus I don't have to worry about trying to convert all of my paper questions into some sort of online one, getting guys to do some sort of lockdown browser or something. So you'll do that next week. As of right now, there are 50 questions, and you have 1 hour and 10 minutes to do them. It'll cover chapters 1 through 6, and I believe 18 and 20. Yeah. And we'll review for that next week. But pretty much it's just the first 4 topics here.
So is the midterm open like starting next week and we can complete it in that week, or does it have to be done right? Like let's say we find Sunday or we do it Thursday?
You should, it should open at the start of next week, and then you'll have until Sunday night of next week to do it.
So basically like the quiz.
Yeah, except the midterm. And speaking of the quiz, you all did really well again, so I was quite pleased with that. The average was down, but we did have one outlier. So like the average score was like an 82, 83%, something like that. But if you take out the outlier, then the average goes up to roughly like a, I think it's like a 90, 92%, something like that. So yeah, you all did really, really well. I was quite pleased with that. Glad to see that you're able to take what we're learning in class and at least, find the correct answers for those quizzes. So well done there. All right.
I think that could be helpful too.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. It makes the book a little bit more palatable too, because it's not just, okay, here's your text, read it kind of thing. Yeah, yeah, and that definitely does help. Anytime you have some sort of, testing your knowledge kind of thing, it really does help to reinforce that whole learning. All right, I want to start off today with fad diets here. So when you think of a fad diet, what kind of comes to mind for you?
Keto,
Why would you say that?
because a lot of people do it, and I feel like I see a lot about it on like social media.
Okay, so how would you define a fad diet?
Just a diet that a lot of people are trying out.
Okay, okay, some sort of celebrity endorsement. So you're kind of viewing it as almost like synonymous with a fad in terms of like, say, clothing. Okay, no, that makes sense. What about you two?
And I guess, yeah.
All right, and it's not terribly off base there. If you're a fad diet, you usually or most always have a name for it, but not all named diets are fad diets, but most all fad diets are named. Some examples of that are like the DASH diet for hypertension, the Mediterranean diet for cholesterol. If you look here, the South Beach diet is actually a really good one for cholesterol. But then you see a lot of these other ones here, like, the Atkins diet was the original keto diet. Well, not really the original, but the ketogenic diet started back in the 50s to help treat children with epilepsy. And it was also noted that those children actually lost weight as well. So it was kind of left dormant for decades. In the meantime, we had the Atkins diet, which is a substitute for it, and that's kind of eliminate all carbs, because carbs are your enemies in terms of that. Have you heard of drinking, like, say, the gallon of water with your cayenne pepper and lemon juice? Yeah, those are fun ones. Oh, the apple cider vinegar, that'll cure everything, right? And then the one word I hate, it's just like the bane of my existence when it comes to anything related to nutrition, is detox. If you ever have a detox diet or you're talking about detoxing yourself, you're essentially saying that you do not have a functioning liver or kidneys, because that's what those organs do. If you didn't have either of those, then yes, you would need to detox your body, usually by something like, say, what's the word? Dialysis, there we go. So yeah, when you look at the actual components of a fad diet, the major benefit that virtually all of them will give you is weight loss. That's pretty much the number one benefit that's being purported from all of these. Weight loss, and weight loss quickly. If I'm losing weight, so like I'm trying to lose weight, how much weight should I lose in a given week?
Like no more than 1 to 2 pounds.
All right, any other guesses? Do it. 5, okay. How about you two?
1 to 2. Possibly 3.
Okay, so 1 to 2, 1 to 3, up to 5. Let's do some quick math here. How many calories are in a pound? So 3,500 calories per pound. If I were losing 1 pound a week, I would need a deficit of 3,500 calories. If I lost 2 pounds a week, how many calories would I need to have a deficit of over the course of that week? Yeah. If I wanted to lose 5 pounds, yeah, 3,500 times 5, 17,500. Those numbers seem very daunting when you look at them just like that. But when you break it down over the course of a week, this turns into 500 calories per day. This would turn into 100 calories per day. This here would turn into 2,500 calories per day. When you're trying to lose weight, and it's really a misnomer saying weight loss, because no one really cares about, when you say you want to lose weight, you're not just saying I want to just lower the number. What are you actually saying you want to do? Yeah, you want to get rid of fat, right? That's the whole premise of why people want to lose weight. They want to get rid of fat. You know, how many of you want to get rid of your muscle mass? I have too high a bone density. I need to get rid of that. Actually, when I was health coaching, I had a client once who was told by her doctor she was pre-diabetic and needed to lose weight. And, you know, I had to give her credit for thinking out of the box, but she said, well, I have really long hair. What happens if I just like cut like a foot off of my hair? Won't that help me lose like, you know, a couple pounds? I mean, so, you know, E for effort in terms of, you know, thinking outside the box, but no, that doesn't really work that way. So 1 to 2 pounds a week is about what you want to shoot for. Not only is that realistic, but that's also about the max your body can handle in terms of actual fat loss. When you start dropping too fast, too quick, one of two things happens. You either lose water, so you're losing just fluids. So if you, you know, you can lose like 10 pounds in a day. That's no problem. I'll just throw on my sweatsuit and go run outside in the heat. And yeah, I will sweat out 10 pounds of fluid. Have I really lost weight though? No, because it's going to come right back on as soon as I drink some water, kind of thing, hopefully. There's a condition called diabetes insipidus, not to be confused with diabetes mellitus, that is essentially a thirst problem, and not in the way you kids talk about it these days, but you essentially can't hold on to fluids, and your urine output is like roughly 20 liters a day. So essentially everything you drink comes like straight out of you. So the only thing you can do is just drink more. Say, it would be terrible, I think, like sleeping, if you had to like get up like constantly throughout the night because you had a full bladder. That'd be terrible. But anyways, when you are losing too much, it's either water weight or you're going to start losing fat-free mass. Because if you start losing tons of weight, what do you have to do to actually lose the weight? You can only lose weight in 2 ways, aside from like amputation. Exercise and diet. So I either burn more calories through exercise or activity, or I consume less calories in my diet. The ideal way you do it is to combine the both. Diet itself is best for losing the weight number. It'll help you to drop weight, but it's not going to help you hold on to muscle mass as effectively. Exercise is really good for maintaining muscle mass, really good for changing body composition, not good at all for lowering the weight number. But you combine the two and you actually get a product that's greater than the sum of the parts. It's one of these things where 2 + 2 = 5. And not in a, Brave New World or 1984 kind of way. So if you're trying to lose the weight too fast, your body will start going into essentially a starvation mode because you've either not given it enough calories or you've physically taxed it to the point where it's going to start having to break down proteins to give you more ATP. Now, there's some exceptions to this, like if you're sick, you're definitely going to lose a bunch of weight. If you're in, a literal starvation mode, yeah, you're going to drop a bunch of weight kind of thing. But when you're talking about just planned actual weight loss, 1 to 2 pounds a week is what you want to shoot for. Just as we can't say, hold on to proteins, we can't store proteins, we can't get rid of fats in a fast way. Otherwise, one workout and your gut would be gone, kind of thing. So back to our fad diets here. Usually, when you see a fad diet, they will give you either some sort of anecdotal or purported scientific evidence or some sort of study that's gone on, that they've done with it, or they're interpreting results of other studies to make better claims on their own diet. The problem is they typically, and by they I mean the manufacturers of said diet, are usually either misinterpreting information or they are deceptively giving you essentially false information. So I wanted to show you a couple of these things here. All these nice, what you would call like these self-proclaimed health experts. This girl here, Whitney, she is the Montreal Healthy Girl. She came out with this, saying cancer is a good thing. Right? Yeah, that's, yeah, wow. She essentially goes on to say that your cancer is your body's way of telling you that your diet is too acidic and you need to start having a more alkaline or a basic diet in order to counterbalance that. So needless to say, she is promoting like an alkaline or a high pH diet. I don't know about you, but I would really never say that cancer is a good thing. I mean, yeah, there's certain cancers I would rather have than others, but if I had the choice, I would have none, kind of thing. And then have you ever heard of this lady here? Jilly Juice. So this is essentially the recipe for this. You are drinking fermented cabbage or fermented kale. I don't know if you've ever been around anything that's fermented, but it doesn't really smell the best, especially if you're fermenting like for example, I ferment sugars to turn them into alcohol. I would never drink what is left over from those byproducts. Not only is there things like, say, methanol in there, which can, make you go blind and die, but it's just absolutely disgusting. That's why, you distill out alcohol or ethanol, and it's pretty much pure for the most part. If you ever smelled sauerkraut, it's worse than that. But her claims are a little bit on the outlandish side. First off, 1 tablespoon of salt for this. How much salt are we supposed to have? And by salt, I mean sodium. How much sodium you're supposed to have during the course of a day? What's the recommended daily allotment? It is 1/2 of a teaspoon, or under 2,300 milligrams a day of sodium. A tablespoon is 3 teaspoons. So this is 6 times the recommended amount of sodium you should have in a day in one serving, like in one sitting here. That doesn't count anything else that you've done. That is very problematic. If you have too high a sodium, it is going to shoot up your blood pressure. It's also going to cause a whole lot of fluid balance or fluid imbalances. Pretty much if you consume this, you are going to have massive diarrhea for quite some time, especially as you continue to do it. Her claims with it are that it can do everything from, say, regrowing limbs to curing cancer to also, get this, it can cure homophobia or homosexual behaviors. So if you are a homosexual, you just pop in some of that jelly juice and you are cured. Because apparently it's all in your diet, right? That's it. Problem solved. What I find here funny, and this is again goes into more of the misinterpreting the science here. High blood pressure is from people who are on prescription drugs, dehydrated, suppressing their prostaglandin, and constricts their blood vessels. How to lower your blood pressure? Drink water, eat salty stuff. Yeah, no. Hydration is always a good thing. Too much hydration is not that great, especially if you do have high blood pressure. It's important that you don't hold on to fluids because the less blood volume you have, the easier it is on your heart. Your heart doesn't have to work nearly as hard to do that. Absolutely. Yep. That's pretty much spot on there. Yeah. And the caveat with this is that when we talk about salt consumption, people tend to think salt equals sodium, and it doesn't necessarily do that. You want to distinguish sodium from all the other salts, which are typically, you're talking about your electrolytes. And a typical American diet overconsumes sodium, underconsumes potassium. You still want to have about, at minimum, 5 grams of salts in your diet per day. But you need to balance that out between your sodium, your magnesium, your potassium. Well, chloride's gonna be stuck in there usually as an extra there. But you do need to have salts, but it's the right kind of them. Think about your macronutrients. How good would it be if you just had one macronutrient every day? Like, I'm just eating pure fats. That's it. I mean, life's not going to work out so well for you, right? Prostaglandins are a class of eicosanoids. So we've talked about those before. And what those do is they are essentially like signaling type hormones. Prostaglandins are a derivative of omega-6 fatty acids. They're found in all animal tissues. And what they do is they have a localized effect of being a vasodilator. So that is correct of what she's saying here, that is what prostaglandins do. Their mechanism of action is it's not activated by increasing salt. And they're local, so it's not like something that's going to be circulating through your whole body kind of thing. You can't just like say, I'm going to give myself a shot of epinephrine and that circulates through my whole body. No, these are very localized. They're actually located within your cells. They do have that vasodilator effect, and they also have an antiplatelet or an anticoagulant effect. If you actually take antiplatelet medications, so like blood thinners, things like aspirin, it can actually suppress the production of this. So again, she's correct with saying that some medications can suppress your PG production, but at the same time, it's trying to say, okay, if I replace one bad thing with another, that they cancel each other out, right? Because two negatives make a positive. The other half of the prostaglandins are your thromboxanes, so derived from the word thrombosis or a blood clot. Thromboxanes are your body's intra blood vessel coagulants. They're also vasoconstrictors. So if you say have a clogged artery and that plaque ruptures, thromboxanes will rush within seconds to seal that off. Not only are they going to seal off the rupture, they're going to cause vasoconstriction. So not only now do I have a clot in an artery, but my artery is also constricted. Absolute recipe for a heart attack, right? Long-winded way to say fad diets are not good things. Just because something, though, is popular doesn't mean it's necessarily a fad diet. So a fad diet is going to obviously be popular, but just because you have a popular diet, as long as it's backed in actual, real science, as opposed to, pseudoscience or things like that, that's where you can kind of draw the distinction. All right, so I want to do a little fact or fiction here for you. So first off, are eggs bad for you? Yes or no? All right, some shaking your heads of no. Why no? They do?
Even though there's like, it says like high in cholesterol and milk, but like, I don't know specifically how much is in there, but it's kind of a small amount, so I don't know.
Relatively speaking.
Well, it's small, so.
Yeah, eggs are not terrible for you. However, I wouldn't, be consuming a dozen eggs a day, but even having a couple eggs a day is not a terrible thing. They're actually pretty well balanced in terms of their carb, protein, and fat count. If you're eating egg whites, you get rid of most of the beneficial stuff in there. However, you do eliminate most all the cholesterol and fats from it. Because unlike, say humans who have an umbilical cord attached to their child, any egg-laying animal does not. So the yolk is essentially all the nutrients that growing embryo or fetus would need to go from fertilization to birth. So that's why you have the yolk there, is just simply to get the nutrients into the growing chick. All right, high fructose corn syrup worse than cane sugar. I mean, we talked about this before, and yeah, that's absolutely true. Your body is going to turn high fructose corn syrup into fats at about a 20% faster rate than it would for cane sugar. So your corn syrup, even though it's almost identical in terms of the composition compared to actual like sucrose, it's going to be used by our bodies completely differently. All right, and how about the Diet Pop's better for you than regular? As I sit here and drink my Cherry Coke Zero. Okay. All right, why?
I don't know, people say artificial sugar is still really bad for you. And it's like a cause cancer. I don't know.
Well, yeah, there are some artificial sweeteners that are known carcinogens. You're not going to usually see those in any food products anymore. But the other thing too is, remember, most diet pops are flavored with aspartame. Aspartame is about 200 times sweeter than glucose. So in an average, say 20-ounce bottle of pop, you're looking at anywhere from, roughly 30 to 60 grams of sugar. So divide that number by about 200. That's how much you actually have in there. Artificial sweeteners will, especially like aspartame, will have a similar caloric composition because in such minute amounts that it's really negligible. So there's probably like a calorie or two in here, but it's negligible. The problem with diet pops, folks, the problem with diet pop is the fact that it has 0 calories. When you first see food, what does your body do? Like, let's say you're at a restaurant and you've ordered food and then you see that tray come out and you do the whole, is that mine kind of thing? And then you realize, oh yeah, it is. What then happens in your body?
You get hungry, you start salivating.
Yeah. Your body starts preparing for food. You eat first with your eyes, right? And then, your smell is another thing there. Very difficult to eat something that smells terrible, even if it tastes amazing. So example, there would be like, say, a mung fruit or a durian fruit. There we go. Mung beans are another one though. Smell terrible, but actually taste quite delicious. I had it once when I was in the Caribbean, and yeah, it's one of those things that you've just got to commit. If you don't commit to it, you're not going to do it. But when your body gets ready for food, it does a lot of different processes. You start salivating because you are anticipating food entering your mouth. You are going to start turning on, or at least getting ready for your gastric juices to start going, because if I have food in there, I need, to be ready to digest it. Your body will then start releasing insulin so that it'll help to maintain your blood glucose regulation. But again, there's 0 calories in here. If I don't have any calories, I don't have anything to digest, right? So the problem with this is that if I drink this by itself, it tastes sweet, right? Or has a sweetness to it. You associate sweetness with what?
Sugar.
Sugar. And sugar you associate as being what? What type of macronutrient?
Carbohydrate.
Carbs. And carbs all contain what? Calories. This is sweet and does not contain calories. You really want to piss off your body, you drink this by itself, because your body tastes sweet and it thinks calories. Well, if it's sweet, it's going to have carbs. That means release insulin so we can regulate blood sugar. It gets down to the stomach and it's like, where's my carbs? What are you doing here? I have all this insulin waiting. We got to give it something to do. So our body says, you know what, screw you guys, I'm getting my carbs. And it turns on additional hormones to make you hungrier. So it says that if you're not going to give me carbs, I'm going to make your life miserable until you give me some calories. People that consume these tend to eat more. That's the big problem with it. Now, the caveat with it is that if you are consuming this along with a meal, it's not necessarily the worst thing because I'm still getting my calories with a meal. If I consume this on its own, then my body won't like that. So, Mike, why do you drink that? Well, I'm glad you asked. I get to cheat the system because I take Adderall. And Adderall, on top of being a nice thing to keep focus and attention, is also a central nervous system stimulant. A side effect of that is that it is an appetite suppressant. So I can drink this, and I give a big middle finger to my pancreas and say, I'll tell you when I need insulin. All right, now how about this one? If you cook or microwave foods, it makes them lose nutrients. What do you think you're going to lose? There you go. So you are going to be typically losing water-soluble vitamins if you cook your food. Well, small trade-off for, say, making sure something is safe to eat or something like that. This is the premise behind, like, say, the raw food diet. A raw food diet essentially means that you don't cook anything over, I believe it's like 120 degrees, something like that. Because after that, you start denaturing proteins and losing a lot of your water-soluble vitamins to evaporation. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I have a hard time, like, say, eating things like, say, chicken without cooking them. I mean, that salmonella guy is not too much fun. Oh yeah, humans, there are people that do a raw food diet. I mean, and they're not necessarily like vegetarians or vegans, but they just will only consume foods essentially that aren't cooked. Well, to each his own. All right, fresh better than farmed or frozen, organic better than non-organic. So if I have, let's say, first off, an organic food product, how is that made? Yeah, that's one of the things. There's nothing artificial in it, essentially. It's all natural kind of thing. Cocaine's all natural. I don't know if that's the best thing in the world, but when you have an organic food, the big thing is you're not using, like, say, growth hormones, certain chemicals like pesticides. You're growing the food typically, or generally speaking, in a natural environment without usually much any interference. If you had, like, say, organic beef, it would be like, your grass-fed cows that are free range and they don't have growth hormones or antibiotics in them or anything like that. Cost more, but is it better than non-organic? Why? Yeah, for some of them. Now, mind you, all of those are regarded as generally recognized as safe, meaning there haven't been any long-term studies showing that they have any negative side effect on you. It's kind of like if you ever see any commercials about say, removing the skins from tomatoes. There's two ways you remove the skin of a tomato. You use lye, or you essentially boil them, and then you have to painstakingly kind of peel them off. And if you use lye, it's so much easier. It like does it for you. The steaming bit is much more expensive. And what's funny is you ever see commercials that are promoting the steaming bit, it'll always say in fine print, the use of lye is generally regarded as a safe practice. you're not entirely wrong there. You're not getting pesticides in terms of like, say, the old DDT stuff that like, you know, will mutate your body kind of thing and kill your children. But you still, it's also why you should be washing off your foods, especially your produce, because it could contain, you know, trace amounts of that. Again, even if you're using a commercial pesticide, you wouldn't be consuming it in the quantity needed to have an adverse event. I also think that I don't want any of that. So granted, I rarely buy organic because it just costs more, but still want to wash off everything. Now, how about the fresh versus farm to frozen? Oh, so long story short there, organic and non-organic are essentially considered equivalent.
Yeah, my brother used to work in like the produce section of a grocery store and said that like people buy organic all the time because they think it's better. But he said that like when they farm organic stuff, it takes like twice the like area of land. So he said it's just honestly kind of bad for the environment at that point.
It can be, yeah.
Unless you have like vertical farming.
It's very hard to do like vertical farming on
Yeah.
in a commercial scale.
So
But yeah, you're absolutely right, because plants need X amount of space. If I use GMOs, I can modify it so they don't need that much space. It's just better use of the land for the most part, but the degradation of the soil isn't, you know, it doesn't discriminate against your organic status. Now, fresh better than farmed or frozen. So consider fresh produce and fresh fish or seafood versus frozen or farmed. So at farmed, I'm referring to like fish. What's better?
maybe farm because of conservatism. Frozen food.
What do you mean by that?
Like, I don't know how to explain. Like farm goods are more. I don't know how to explain that.
That's okay. So when it comes to produce, and you think of like your frozen vegetables, especially, fresh and frozen are the same. You aren't losing anything with them. Now, the longer something stays frozen, you may start seeing, you know, a decline in the taste of it. But as far as nutritional content, it's going to be equivalent. So as far as produce is concerned, fresh and frozen are the same. Frozen is going to last longer because it's frozen. Now, you can always freeze your fresh produce. I wouldn't go and freeze, unfreeze. That's not usually the best thing to do, and go back to freezing again. But the farm, if you are farming fish, especially, that is actually much worse than having a wild caught fish. And it's all because of their environment. If I have a wild caught fish, it costs more money to actually get. I don't have just like a pen that I can just pick one out, you know? But at the same time, I have a pen and I'm putting tons of fish in there. Disease can spread a lot easier. And the other thing too is you don't have a chance for those fish to have a natural diet, because you don't want the fish staying in there forever. You know, you got to sell them eventually. It's a lot more difficult to say pump hormones into fish just from the nature of them. So what will happen is that you feed fish a much higher grain-based diet. Typically, what do fish eat in the wild? Other fish, very small crustaceans, like the blue whale, biggest animal on Earth, eats krill. tiny little microscopic crustaceans. Well, you don't have 40 tons of that sitting around in a pen here for all these little fish to eat. So you feed them grains. Fish should not have fats in them in terms of, like, say, saturated fats. They should be very lean. They should have oils. You take a fish oil supplement for your omega-3, 6 fatty acids. If you're feeding a grain-based diet, you actually force fish to start storing fat the same way that a cow would store fat. So now, you know how you have a steak that has all that nice marbling in it, it tastes amazing? Now you're making fish do the same thing. Arguably, it does make for a better taste, but health-wise, it actually hurts quite a bit. And we've talked about GMOs before. Remember, GMOs are genetically modified organisms. That can be it's any change to the genetic composition of typically a plant, or it could be an animal as well, or in very rare cases, actually I can only think of one case of humans. The FDA doesn't even acknowledge the term GMOs because their stance is that virtually everything is modified in some way or another. So by saying something is GMO or not, you can't certify that because pretty much everything we have has been modified somehow. All right, we talked about weight loss already. And this is just kind of an FYI for you about how you would actually measure, like, say, serving sizes or things like that. I know it's a little dated. I mean, I'm not sure any of you have a nice iPod Classic. I remember, it maddens me because I remember back in like 2000, 2001, I actually got a first generation iPod. You know, it didn't even have like a USB connector. It was a FireWire connector. So it wouldn't even work like on my home computer because we didn't even have that connection for it. And then I find out that those first generation iPods go for like $10,000, $20,000. Like, good Lord, I'm in the wrong business here. Do any of you even have DVDs? Yeah. All right, we've talked about sarcopenia before. So remember, sarcopenia is age-related loss of muscle mass and strength. Starts happening to virtually everyone when you're right around the age 30 or so. It's not that you can't overcome it, it's just you have to actually work a little harder to do that. Now, I want to get into kind of the psychology of eating here. When you're eating, you eat for two reasons. What are they? I'm going to choose to interpret that as the correct answer. You have a physiological need for food, so energy, and then you have a psychological desire for food or satisfaction. So I'm saying you're absolutely correct. Those are the only two reasons why you eat. You eat to survive or you eat because you want to. We are going to be talking about the eat because you want to side, i.e. the psychology of eating. I used to use this line with people who wanted to do a ton of exercise, but never wanted to change their diet. So what's easier to do, eating a candy bar or running for half an hour? Much easier, right? Typical candy bar, how many calories do you think that has? Just a regular size one, not your king size or anything. And not fun size. There's nothing fun about fun size. I used to hate those houses on Halloween. But now we don't have Halloween anymore, so. You're not really far off. Depending on what it is, about 200 to 400. That's kind of a lot. If you're running for half an hour, you're going to burn anywhere from about 200 to 400 calories. So much easier to put the candy bar down or to have to go and do all that. The point is that you can't outrun your diet. If you try to make changes without having a dietary approach to it, then you are not going to have long-term success. You always hear about like the anomalies with this. So someone like a Michael Phelps who would consume something like 12,000 calories a day. Well, what else was he doing? He was swimming for roughly 8 hours a day. I mean, yeah, you actually should be eating that many calories if you're working out that long. He also produces about 25% less lactic acid than the normal person, so he can exercise much longer because he has a much lower time, or sorry, much longer time to fatigue than the normal person. I like this little quote here. You know, I really hate my job sounds a lot like I want potato chips right now. When you think of, say, emotional eating, what kind of foods do you associate with that? Yeah, probably not, you know, your kale chips and apples and all that. I can't think of a time when, you know, it's like I had a terrible day. I really am looking forward to having an orange when I get home. No, you have the ice cream, you have the potato chips, you have all those nice snack foods. And it makes you feel better. Well, why does it make you feel better? And what does that actually mean? How is it comforting to you?
Well, like with comfort foods, people eat first to feel better.
Yeah, so I'm just asking, why does it make you feel better? Would you say? Yes. And you said serotonin? That's one of them, yeah. Serotonin and dopamine, those are your body's natural antidepressants. Have you all heard of Pavlov's dog? So in short, the dog would get a meal and the researcher would ring a bell and the dog would salivate. And eventually the dog was trained to hear the bell and it would start salivating, anticipating a meal, even if a meal did not come. This is your basic form of classical conditioning. So you would learn that in general psych. What's happening here with the psychology of eating is all about these afferent and efferent pathways. Afferent and efferent neurons are the two types of neurons that make up your central nervous system. These are stimulus recognition and a response to a stimulus. You can have both a positive or a feedback loop. So if I use an afferent pathway, this is getting or seeing an actual stimulus. The efferent pathway is our body's response to that stimulus. So if I consume, let's say, caffeine, I see my pop and I may start salivating. That is my afferent response. When I consume the pop, the caffeine acts as a stimulant. It attaches to different chemical receptors I have in my brain, and it gives me a boost of energy or, you know, makes me less jittery or whatever. That is my efferent response. The efferent pathway is how addiction occurs. Because what happens if I just completely stop drinking pop altogether? Yeah, I would actually go through withdrawals from it. Probably be like shaky, maybe have blurred vision, more so than without my glasses. Be irritable. I might have, altered energy levels. And that's because my body is going through a chemical withdrawal from it. Now, everyone can get through a caffeine withdrawal. I mean, that's not a big issue. Even things like, say, nicotine, yeah, it's not going to make you feel great. No withdrawal is great, but you can just quit cold turkey if you really wanted to. You take something like, I don't know, heroin. You can't just quit that cold turkey because your body has a chemical need for it. If you quit completely without like weaning yourself off after being addicted for X amount of time, your body can actually die from the withdrawals of it. What happens is that these efferent pathways produce more and more receptors the more of a drug or a product you introduce into them. That's why you don't get the same high or the same effect after the first time you do something. It's because your body produces more receptors and you need to give it more of that thing to get even a lessened result to it. So chemically speaking, this is how food psychology, or this is how really the psychology of eating actually works. You see junk food and you say, I want that inside of me. You eat said food. It now releases dopamine into your system, making you feel good. What's the problem with that? And don't misconstrue this for everyone that ever emotionally eats, because we all have that. All of a sudden they have like food addiction or something like that. All right. And why do you think that would be something that would happen? If one's good, 50 is better. Absolutely. You can essentially classically condition yourself to know that I feel good when I eat this food. If that food is not a healthy food, you can see how that can become problematic. Because unless you have, a ton of like, say, self-control, that's why I hate seeing those little, whatever, Ben & Jerry's things that are that big, little shooters of them. What's the point of that? It's one spoonful. You can very easily get tons of excess calories, or say things like saturated or trans fats, higher sodium, higher cholesterol, all that nice fun stuff from overconsumption due to emotional eating. And like I said, that's not, just because somebody does that occasionally doesn't mean they have a problem, but that would be essentially the basis of how you do eventually get a problem with overconsumption, would because of the triggering of dopamine in your system there. That kind of makes sense? So how do we change it? Well, behavior modification. That's it. I'm going to go back to the heroin addict here. Any of you ever watched the show Intervention? Or have you heard of it? Okay, so essentially it's a documentary kind of thing where they follow around people who are addicts, and then eventually they have an intervention, send to rehab, and life's great. If you go to rehab for, say, a drug addiction, why is it probably not good to then go back home after treatment?
Relapse.
Why?
Because you're not being monitored all the time.
Kind of.
Or you're going back to like the old conditions where you used to be.
Yes, you were going back to the same environment. Well, if my drug dealer still lives next door to me, I mean, that's a very big temptation to have when, you're newly sober kind of thing. That's why it's recommended for about the first 12 to 18 months post-recovery that you do not go home because of that of that reason. That essentially you sever ties with like all of your friends and limit contact with your family. That's you know, it's a difficult thing to do, but that's the nature of recovery. It's also why nationally recovery rates are less than 10%, or long-term recovery rates. So how does this play into food? Well, let's think about it. You have a Starbucks there, right? And how did you get that today? Okay. And where is Starbucks in relation to where you live? Okay. Very close, right? Do you pass by that frequently? Okay. How easy is it for you to go and get a Starbucks when it's essentially on your way? Exactly. If I see that every single day, it's very hard to avoid it. So how can I use that to get rid of ever buying Starbucks again? Change your route, right? Now, I know it's pretty difficult because there's a Starbucks on almost every corner, but you get the idea. If you're avoiding that altogether, so if I plan out my route to avoid that, I would literally have to go out of my way and make a cognitive decision to go and circle my way back to it. How many of you buy stuff in the grocery store at the checkout counter?
Oh, stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I always like grab a pack of gum.
Is that something that's like regularly on your shopping list? Exactly. However, if you go to, say, the self-checkout, there are no stuff at the whatever little trinkets there. So how we change our underlying behavior for food is we avoid, to the best we can, some of these higher risk type environments. So if you don't want to eat McDonald's, you want to make sure that you don't travel right next to a McDonald's, because you don't want to have that temptation of just, oh, I can just pull in here real quick. And planning goes a big way with it as well. You know, typically you have a shopping list. Well, if you planned out a full shopping list and you stuck straight to it, are you going to buy anything that's not on that list? No. Problem is that, you know, advertisers do a really good job of making things look very good. So it's kind of hard to miss that sometimes. But you see how doing things like that, where you avoid the potential issue or set yourself up for making it eliminated from things like your shopping, how that can help get rid of it overall. How would you do that if you went out eating? Like, I'm going out to this restaurant, I'm going to the Cheesecake Factory tonight. I mean, I'm not, but what could you do there?
Well, the Cheesecake Factory has like everything, so I guess you can choose a healthier option on the menu, but it's still pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, probably not going to be getting the best thing there regardless. But think about back to our shopping list. Apply that to going out to eat. Maybe. There you go. Everyone has their menus published these days. So if you go and you pick out what you want to eat ahead of time, it makes it a lot easier for you to avoid, like, oh man, that special sounds really good kind of thing. Or, hey, 2-for-1 mimosas. I mean, can't say no to a bottle of champagne, right? Planning ahead goes a long way with most everything here. Now, obviously, yes, this is a very big oversimplification because this stuff takes a lot of work. I mean, at my best, I was sitting at around like 200 pounds of 5% body fat. But I had to track every single calorie I put in my body and what was in it and life was miserable because my diet was, I hated it. You know, I hated just all the protein bars and the lack of junk food I got, and no alcohol and all that, and working out every day. God. But I had a great body. So, I mean, price of beauty, right? So I'll talk about altering the environment. Okay. Last thing with this is all about cognitive restructuring. You all heard of Weight Watchers? What does Weight Watchers do? Kind of. Yeah.
Calorie filter.
Essentially. And they do one other thing. There you go. I know, it's right on the screen. Weight Watchers does two things. Their diet side of thing is a point system. You get X amount of points to spend each day on food. It doesn't matter what you do, as long as you stay within that point system. And it works pretty decent. Granted, you know, you can always cheat, I guess, but at the same time, if you follow that, you would, in theory, be able to get, you know, a overall healthy diet. You would essentially learn from your mistakes because you get like punished for having junk food and you get rewarded for having healthy food because of the cost of it. But more importantly, they have meetings. Meetings are the biggest factor for why something like a Weight Watchers works. Why would meetings be important? Yeah, you have other people there to keep you accountable, and you also have that whole group that depends on you as well. Everyone acts as their own kind of anchor. So like in the little circular picture there, everyone's essentially holding on chain link to everyone else. Everyone depends on everyone else to make the chain work. If you have a partner, if you have a group of people, whatever, your odds of long-term success are exponentially higher than if you go at it alone. This isn't to say you can't do it alone, but it's just so much harder. And again, go back to, I'll go back to the rehab example. When you're in recovery, what does every person in recovery get to help keep them accountable? I mean, this is kind of a good thing because it shows that you aren't well acquainted with, you know, like the whole drug world, which is kind of, or like the street drug world. So maybe that's kind of a good thing. They do, but they get a sponsor. A sponsor is someone who is later on down the road in their own personal recovery, but a sponsor is someone who is theoretically 100% of the time, 24/7, always available for your person. If I have any cravings or things like that, I call up my sponsor and they can essentially talk me off the edge, kind of thing. So sponsors are there to help keep you accountable. That goes a long way with helping people to stay clean because they have somebody who is holding them accountable and someone, you know, essentially like a mentor-esque figure whom they have to answer to. I mean, how many of you want to come to class here and me call you out saying, why didn't you do your homework? Especially in front of everyone, kind of thing, you know? I don't think I'd be allowed to do that anyway because of FERPA, but you get the idea. You know, you don't want to, you know, let these people down, kind of thing. So that goes a long way with helping that overall recovery. Now, when we look at what happens here in this whole cognitive restructuring plan, This is where we tie our thoughts and emotions into behaviors. It's all cyclical. How many times have you, or have you ever, I should say, read, seen, heard something and just had like a hair trigger emotional response? Yeah, everyone's done something like that. What happens if you take your time, think out a response, and really play out kind of the scenarios of what happens if I do this or that kind of thing? What then happens to your response? Typically, right? I think about any time I want to send like a nasty email, I'll usually write that nasty email out, but then I just read over it and think, is this something that I should do? Or is this something that will help me keep my job? If it is no, then I do not do that thing. But even like reading that over once, I then can go back and edit it, and then essentially it turns into, a research paper kind of thing eventually, but it is much better worded. Even though this whole cognitive restructuring triangle, goes all ways, it really starts with your thoughts, progresses to your emotions, and then into your behaviors. If you're able to essentially, and this is why I have the Willie Nelson quote here, but if you're able to start thinking more positively or thinking about doing better behaviors, eventually you convince yourself to start doing those behaviors and they become then more of a habit. It's kind of like if you are ever forced to smile at a job, eventually, even if you're faking it, you're going to start feeling better. Like you'll start feeling happier if you just smile all the time, kind of thing. You can't do a lot of actions blasé or faking it for long before your body physiologically responds by saying, okay, we're not really faking anymore. I'm actually kind of feeling this. Does that kind of make sense? All right, so that is your big overview there of Fad Diets and our food cognition or psychology meeting. I want to finish up here with starting into the diet and health part of this here. So you notice that in this nice little chart I have here, everything is going to kill you, right? Everything gives you cancer, everything gives you high blood pressure, everything gives you heart disease, everything makes you obese. So yeah, what are you going to do? But no, you look at this here and you see that any of the areas that have the most amount of stuff checked off are usually the ones that are the worst off for you. Now, mind you, you have these dietary risk factors will be called modifiable. You can change all these. These ones here, for the most part, are non-modifiable. Now, like environmental contaminants, sedentary lifestyle, smoking, or tobacco use, those are still modifiable risk factors. But in general, if you have a diet low in saturated trans fats, high in different plants, pretty much that solves all your problems. You don't have to worry about diet high in salty foods or a diet high in added sugars if you have a plant-based diet. Most everyone can agree that the general premise of all healthy diets should be a plant-based diet. If you're doing that, it's going to be very, very difficult to consume an abundance of bad stuff or not consume enough good stuff. It's very difficult to do that. pretty much, if you did that and you didn't smoke or drink, and then you exercise regularly, like you got it made. That's easy. Problem is, it's kind of easier said than done, though, right? I mean, you know, Oreos taste awfully good, kind of thing. One of the things that we'll see, and especially when we get into topics 7 and 8, is that obesity is a major factor in most all disease. Largely speaking, especially if you talk about like exercise science and nutrition standpoint, you really have only 3 classes of chronic diseases. You would have your metabolic diseases, your cardiovascular diseases, and your renal diseases. So renal would refer to, like, say, your kidneys or your endocrine system. Cardiovascular, like heart, and probably throw the respiratory system in there, so lungs as well, your blood vessels. And then metabolic would refer to anything having to do with your metabolism. If you have metabolic syndrome, it's typically a group of symptoms that will affect your metabolism, but they're also highly correlated with heart problems as well. When you think metabolism, you think thyroid, diabetes. Those are the big ones there. And you notice how obesity connects with everything. Now, while obesity itself isn't a stroke and heart attack factor, it is connected to atherosclerosis and hypertension, which are stroke and heart attack factors. So it's kind of by proxy there. And why is this, especially abdominal obesity, highlighted here? This is also why women in general have better body composition than men, even though you hold on to more fat than men in general. So abdominal obesity has the highest correlation with all-cause mortality. Pretty much, if you're storing fat in your abdomen, you are at a much higher risk for having excessive levels of deeper visceral fat, just like the stuff that surrounds your organs, which you really, I mean, you need it, but you don't need too much of it, kind of thing. Women in general will hold your fat in your hips and thighs. The more bottom heavy you are, the better you are. It's also why you should never skip leg day. Men tend to hold our fat in our chest and abdomen. So you would call that android obesity if you're talking about obesity. For women, it would be gynoid obesity, because most of you will hold your fat in hips and thighs. So fat positioning matters. The more you get fat away from your belly, the better. Now, problem is that fat likes to congregate there. It's a very easy place to stay. So the more you can avoid that, the better off it is for you overall. We've talked about inflammation before. The main thing I want to press on you here is this. When you have an injury, you roll an ankle, sprain an ankle, you get an inflammatory response. Your ankle swells up. That's your body's way of protecting you from further injury, and it starts the healing process. Good. If I get inflammation without an injury, or even worse, like an internal, like an intravascular injury, that's not good, because my body is saying that something is injured when it really isn't. So remember how I said earlier about those prostaglandins and thromboxanes. The thromboxanes act as a vasoconstrictor and a coagulant or a platelet coagulant, meaning that inside of a blood vessel, they will clot that blood and constrict the vessel itself. So it gets, the blood vessel itself gets smaller 2 ways. You want to have that when you're, like I said, when you have an injury. Like if I have a cut, I want that to coagulate, right? I mean, I need that thing to clot. You know, if I have hemophilia and I get a nosebleed, you know, that could be fatal kind of thing. But if I have that happen inside a blood vessel, you can very easily see how that can cut off circulation at that blood vessel, right? We'll talk about this here later. Is that, oh, this here, cytokines. So you may have heard one of the big problems or side effects you have with COVID is this cytokine storm, is the term that's being used. Essentially, this is your body's immune system response. You go and you get these cytokines which will go and kill pathogens. Problem is that if you get an over response of them, hence the term storm, if you get too much of a response, it can essentially kill you. So if your body doesn't kill you, you're fine. But that's a big ask and something we really can't control. But we'll talk about those later on in the semester here. This here's kind of what I want to finish up on. So, talked already about how this all happens here. The main thing to remember here is C-reactive protein. C-reactive proteins are your body's inflammatory or inflammation markers. This has the highest correlation with cardiovascular incidents and cerebral vascular accidents, so heart attacks and strokes. You want to have low levels of C-reactive protein. The higher they are, again, without injury, means that they are constricting blood vessels and promoting clotting from within your body. And again, you don't want that. We've talked about atherosclerosis, or the hardening of your arteries. CAD, or coronary artery disease, that's when you have blockages in your coronary arteries. Aneurysms. These are aneurysms. You don't usually get an aneurysm from a vein. It's typically from a artery. And that's just because arteries are elastic, veins really aren't. And an aneurysm is just when you stretch out that artery wall. So it forms like a balloon there. You can theoretically get an aneurysm in any blood vessel, but the two big ones that you see most often are your aorta and your carotid artery. So brain aneurysm, aortic aneurysm. If you have, like, say, a brain aneurysm, that's not bad per se. An aneurysm by itself is fine. I mean, I'd rather not have it, but it's not doing anything. It's not until that aneurysm ruptures that we have problems. What's happening there is when I stretch out that piece of the blood vessel, so when I make a balloon here, what happens to the integrity of the balloon? You ever have like one of those squish balls and you squeeze it and then like little bits of it come out of your fingers or whatever? And what's the surface of that like when it's popped out like that? Thin, right? It stretches out. Well, if it's thin, it's a lot easier to break that. That's where the problem comes, because you're taking a what used to be a thick piece of, your blood vessel, and you're stretching it out. If it ruptures, it starts bleeding. In the case of like a brain aneurysm, you die pretty quick. Like your chances of survival are pretty low. I think it's less than 10%. If you have an aortic aneurysm, usually you have a little more time. So if you get, like typically the signs of like an aortic aneurysm are that you will get pulsating in your abdomen, like especially in the middle of your abdomen, but not associated with physical activity. You'd also get an onset of progressively more severe low back pain. Those are usually, and you would also usually get fatigue along with it. So you see those signs coming up and there's no known cause, you probably want to go to the ER pretty quick. If you have a brain aneurysm and someone isn't with you, you're done. Kalostema, no coming back from that. God, I feel like I'm like such a Debbie Downer most days. All right, we've seen how blood clots are tied together with inflammation, hypertension, or high blood pressure. Obviously, that's going to be a bigger role. If I have higher levels of inflammation, my blood vessels will be smaller or constrict. So the smaller they are, the more pressure there is on there. It's like you're using a hose and you put your thumb over the hose, pressure in that water becomes a lot bigger because there's less room for it to come out. So inflammation in an artery, if I close that up, pressure gets higher, so high blood pressure. MI, TIA, CEVA. MI, myocardial infarction or a heart attack, TIA, trans-ischemic attack or a mini stroke, and CVA, cerebral vascular accident or a stroke. What happens here, like we've talked all about like heart attacks and how your coronary arteries get blocked, you have a heart attack. TIA is a mini stroke. This is where you can have like say a spasm in the in a given blood vessel in your brain, or you can have a partial blockage and it can cause temporary really blood loss or ischemia. Well, ischemia just means you have lack of oxygen. It can cause a temporary loss in that. Those you recover from. Typically, you'll see the signs of the TIA are someone that is perfectly lucid and they start speaking with extremely nonsensical words and just keep going like nothing's wrong. So if I were just like talking to you like this, and then all of a sudden you're starting, and and that all makes sense to me, that's not a good sign for anyone else. I wouldn't pick up on it. So usually you're only going to see that happen from somebody else reflecting back to you. And then a stroke, two types of strokes. You can have an ischemic stroke or a hemorrhagic stroke. An ischemic stroke is a blood clot. A hemorrhagic stroke is a brain bleed. When you get to your head, so these here are going to be your carotid arteries. They go up back of your head and they enter this kind of terrible drawing, but almost like a, well, it should be a pentagon kind of thing. This is called your circle of Willis. This is where you're going to have a stroke, because at every one of these junctions, there's a kink in the chain. How much room do I have if I have a straight line? Lots, right? I only have to go one direction. There's no worrying about swerving or anything. If I have to make a turn, now I am decreasing the amount of space I have. When I have a corner, it's very easy to aggregate there, especially like platelets, things like that. So it's very easy to get a clot really in one of those junctions there because it has less overall space available for you. All right, oh, and then, sorry, this is the last thing here, I promise. Yeah, because I didn't want to get into alcohol and then metabolism yet. We'll do that next week. Okay, antioxidants. Anti means against, oxidant means oxidizer. You know everything about antioxidants now, right? The whole point of antioxidants is to neutralize free radicals. Free radicals are just molecules that have an unpaired electron. Or something like that there. This is kind of a bad picture because it shouldn't show this. But that's what a free radical is going to be. It's going to have, you're supposed to have 8 electrons on your valence shell or your outer shell. It typically only has like 7. So you have an unpaired electron. It means that it contains a chemical charge. Molecules do not like to be charged. They want to be balanced. They want to have no charge. So they will go and try to connect to something. Well, in the case of free radicals, these are created from just everyday metabolic purposes. So whenever you just even produce ATP, part of the byproducts there are free radicals. Our body is excellent at neutralizing those. But you get enough of those that are circulating around, and you can start fundamentally, say, like altering your DNA or causing DNA errors. And so you need your antioxidants to neutralize those before they go and cause problems. Antioxidants you think of as, like, say, like a lot of your vitamins, especially like vitamin C, you always read as an antioxidant. So all an antioxidant does is it binds with that free radical to neutralize that unpaired electron. And it neutralizes it before it can go bond with something else that it's not supposed to. If you have a whole lot of antioxidants, a whole lot of free radicals, you can trigger an inflammatory response. So this is why that, having especially a lot of your water-soluble vitamins is important, because it will help to neutralize those. And ultimately, you want to get rid of that. So preventing those damage to your cells. And I do have up here listed all the ways we die. So let's end on a positive note, right? All the red ones are diet related. All the other ones or all the orange ones are kind of not, for the most part. Heart disease and cancer, 1 and 2. Chronic lung disease, number 3. Way, way distant third. Pretty much, if you're able to stave off cancer and you have a heart healthy diet, it is going to elongate your life. Unless you get hit by a bus or something. Really the number one thing to do to avoid really the heart disease side of things is to reduce your body's inflammation. By reducing inflammation, you reduce the tendency of your body to build up plaque and build up clotting factors in your arteries, and it overall reduces your chances of having heart disease. The way you do that, healthy diet and exercise. So everything that no one wants to do is always the thing you have to do for best results. I mean, seriously, how many of you would how many of you want to study for a class that you just don't like? But when you say are learning something you want to learn, how much easier is it to pick up on that? Exactly. So my best advice to you is to find something that you really like about physical activity and or your diet that happens to be healthy and really try to run with it. Like, for example, I mean, I will never touch green beans. My mom force fed those on me when I was a kid, and I remember I threw up, and then I got punished. And she maintains that 3-year-old me forced myself to throw up. And I'm saying that no, I didn't, because they tasted disgusting. I try them about once every 5 years or so, just to see if anything's changed. No, nothing has changed. It's been 30 years, nothing has changed. But I really like asparagus and I really like Brussels sprouts. So if I ever want to make sure I have a meal that's heavy, and especially my green vegetables, I can throw some of those in there, and like I can eat a plate full of asparagus and feel great. I mean, obviously, I have a protein with it, but the point is finding something that you really enjoy, especially eating, that's healthy, can make a lot of healthy choices easier. And then with exercise, like, look, I'm an exercise physiologist. I don't like exercising. I mean, I know it's a bit of a paradox there, but doing little things throughout the day adds up to quite a big response. So like last year at this time, I was at around about like 285 pounds. And then when we went on like lockdown, I actually started getting kind of in shape-ish. So I'm down to about 245 right now. And all I did was I was doing like 10 to 20 push-ups a day and maybe some crunches if I felt like it. But seriously, like I would just be playing with my kid and just rep out like 10 push-ups. And it's so funny because he'll mimic me and he'll get on his hands and knees and do this. And this is his push-ups, just like that. But the point is, doing even just really small things like that will add up for really pretty considerable results. So there's my 2-second spiel for you. All right, so that is everything new I have for you there. Next week, we are going to get into metabolism and bioenergetics, so more of my fun stuff. And if you don't have any other questions, you are all good to go. And I will see you all next week.